Okay, great. So, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about team forming today. This is just a brief overview, but we'd be happy to obviously have some discussions afterwards if there's specific questions about some of the practicalities of the points we spoke about today. Happy to delve into that. Okay. So, just a little bit about ourselves as Clauser Brothers. We started out in a town that actually doesn't exist, apparently, in Germany. There's a bit of a joke about it. But we come from originally from Bielefeld in Germany. Since then, we've extended to Berlin and also into Poland. And the focus of our company is really, we say, from code to coaching. We have two parts to our business where we have a mainly also most of the people are involved in development projects, building products for customers, or in our partnerships where we're actually developing products together. And then we also have a coaching side where we support companies mainly in the area of agility, working in agile transformations and working with teams implementing agile ideas. And we also have a training component where we are also doing training in the area of Scrum mainly, and also offering bespoke workshops around things like OKRs, etc. And that pretty much covers in a broad sense what we do. And myself personally, I'm a lean agile coach at Clauser Brothers and been involved for several years now in various agile transformations, working with various organizations from larger corporates to startups here in Germany. And yeah, basically based on that, that's where a bit of my experience comes from team forming in this area. And I'd actually like to just start with two stories just to get us warmed up for today. And one of the stories is just about teaming itself, starting a new team. What I've had several of these scenarios where I've gone into an organization and we've had to start new teams. In one of the organizations, it was really a unicorn, and it grew at such a rate. We literally every 2 or 3 weeks we were starting several new teams all at the same time because they were growing so quickly. And nevertheless, in this crazy space, by us actually going through a formal team forming process, we noticed that the teams themselves were able to really get up to speed with what they needed to do, even if many of the developers were very new to the domain, and actually start effectively delivering code, delivering actual value for the end users that were using the systems that they were developing. And it was really quite clear how effective it was in actually having a formal team forming process to get these new teams up and running as quickly as possible. And I've also seen the power of using a team forming process also with teams that have existed for a very long time. It might be been teams that have were formed many years ago. Some of the people, in fact, maybe actually working for 10 or 15 years together. And almost in the days before Agile, etc. And really in a scenario where they're stuck in old ways of thinking and old practices. And we were able to really use this reteaming process to get them not just to, get into an agile way of thinking, but also to actually start to address and think about their ways of working and start improving them and clarifying also some of the sort of unearthed conflicts or conflicts that were hanging in the air that had perhaps had been dragging on for years and that were never resolved and never actually addressed, also clarifying roles, etc. And this also helped to just take those teams to a new level of effectivity. And so I really believe in this process and the idea of team forming, and not, just putting people together and saying, okay, well, just start coding or just start developing, do something, but actually taking a bit of time to put some structure in place to give them focus so that they can actually work and collaborate effectively and deliver value for their customers. So that being said, what is team forming exactly? Well, really, if you think about the process, at the end of the day, we're starting off with someone who has an idea and and is prepared to actually invest in delivering an idea or solving a problem in the market. And usually what they will do is they will go and gather a group of people, and by doing so, they will take that group of people and hopefully form them into a team and say, well, you guys are responsible now for delivering, this value or solving this problem that we have. And essentially, when we go through a team forming process, you can think of it a bit like a launch pad. We're actually setting the platform for effective collaboration of this team. Okay. Like a space rocket, once it gets going, it doesn't perhaps need that much assistance from other systems in order to do what it needs to do. But right at the start, it needs a lot of supporting systems to get it off the ground. And it's very similar when it comes to a team. Once they get going, they're going, the things are in place, the processes are in place that are working. But initially, they need a good launch pad, they need structures in place and assistance to make sure that they have a good start. And so we do that in the team forming process with teams. Another question might come up, okay, so why do we do this? Well, really at the end of the day, one of the most important things is when we actually start out with a team. If you have a bad start, it's hard for a team to recover from a bad start. This is one of the most important aspects that we have. Okay. Um, and one of the things that we're wanting to actually address, in team form is that we actually avoid a bad start. Other key points is that we want to unite the strategy and execution and core values of the team with its organization, and make sure that the team is focused on what is needed for satisfying the customers, and not getting lost in running off on a tangent, but really focus on what they need to do to deliver value. Other reasons is for alignment, not just alignment between the people in the team, but actually alignment between the team and its major stakeholders, making sure that that we're all heading in the same direction. Okay. And another key thing is, why do we do it? Is we want to actually do it as if possible before the pressure begins. So we can actually set a good foundation in place for the team before they start working, because later on it's always much harder. Once they have deadlines in place, once they're supposed to be delivering, it's very difficult to take them away and say, all right, well, let's work on your ways of working, and putting a foundation in place. Of course, you'll see, as I'll mention later, that it is possible to do it, but it's just much harder. And so it makes more sense to do this team forming right at the start. Okay. And as I've said already, we want to lay a solid foundation, giving everyone a chance to provide their input and perspectives on what needs to be accomplished, and then actually begin collaborating. All right. And by doing this, really at the end of the day, what we're also hoping to do is making sure that stakeholders and customer needs, and that the team are actually connected to their stakeholders and really understand those customer needs, and they really have established a relationship, that there's the ability to actually clarify things as they're going along, and a real understanding of what is needed at the end of the day by the people you're delivering value for as a team. So that also every single day the team is constantly needing to make decisions around uh, you know features, etc., that they're building. And it really helps them, just the more they understand the end user and their stakeholders and their needs, it's easier for them to make decisions around what they should be doing in that situation. And of course, other key thing is establishing team norms and standards. If you're working with, especially with teams where people come from different cultures, there's a variety of different ways of working and where you treat each other, etc., what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And you want to actually work those things through right up front. This helps to avoid a lot of friction going into the actual collaboration itself. And one of the key things that I actually like to mention here is that you also want to talk about how you handle conflict as a team. One of the things that's the most important thing that a team can learn is how do we actually hold successful confrontations, or successful or constructive conflict within a team, because this idea that there's no need for conflict is nonsense. If you've worked in a product environment, the best ideas come out of this place of friction. And you actually need to know how to do that in a constructive way. And so this is something that you also need to establish, with these team norms and standards. Okay. So at the end of the day, what is the goal? There's really three things, okay, when it comes to team forming. We want to achieve alignment, not just, as I said, between the team members themselves, but also with the stakeholders, etc. And we want to start building momentum. We can do this when we start to have a clear sense of direction, and we've also worked out our ways of working, then we can actually start to work collaboratively to get together in an effective way. And another key thing is clarifying roles and understanding who's responsible for what, and also what are we responsible for as a team, and how do we work together. So that being said, okay, the question comes up, okay, when do we start actually doing team forming? And as I said, mentioned just now, obviously the best is before a team starts really working, and when they first come together, it's one of the best times. But also once a team is formed, it's not the end of the world. It still makes sense, and I've seen a lot of value in taking time to do team forming exercises, even if a team has been working together for many years. And one other thing I would also mention is that the work doesn't stop as soon as you've completed your workshop. If your teams are doing regular retrospectives and looking back at the past and understanding, where there are areas that they need to improve, etc., those improvement areas, and once new standards have been put in place, are actually a team forming exercise and will usually lead to their team charter being updated. And so this process never really ends, but it is helpful to have a clear workshop at the start, or at some point in time where you take the time to lay the first foundation before you start to build the house on top of it. Okay, cool. So moving along, the question comes up, how do we do team forming? Well, one of the key things for me is to think about having an actual workshop that you run. I like to run a 2-day workshop if possible. Okay, that is one of the best ways to run it. However, it doesn't mean you have to do it all in 2 days. You can also, and this is something I've had to do often, is break up the workshops into smaller sections. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But nevertheless, how do we do this? So we start with some workshop preparation, and you really want to get the people together, the team itself, or the product owner, and maybe one or two of the key stakeholders together, and someone who's going to facilitate the workshop, and just talk about the broader goals of the actual workshop, talk about the agenda for the workshop, and who's going to present what. You really want to have your key sponsors or stakeholders presenting some of the key ideas around the broader goals for the team and the purpose of why the team has been brought together. You need to also talk about logistics, and don't underestimate this part. You know, where you're going to meet, which rooms are you going to need to rent, some rooms somewhere else, drinks, food, etc. And one of the key things I would also recommend is always linking this to some sort of team forming activities that are a little bit more fun. Go and the team can go and eat together afterwards, or do go bowling, or do some fun activity together. You could really mix it all into this time of these 2 days, and make the most of it to really get the whole team to come together and to gel. Okay, great. So that being said, I mean, that's just a quick, short little overview. Of course, there's more to it, but those are some of the key things that you're going to want to do in preparation. And you're probably going to have a short little meeting, or perhaps a longer meeting, to actually make sure that those things are planned. Okay. Then what you like to do for a team forming session or workshop is actually to plan, as I said, a proper workshop for about 2 days. And these are some of the topics that obviously you need to discuss. So how much time are you going to take? I think is the obvious one that we've mentioned. I've spoken about the 2 days. And one of the key things, as I said, is being able to break it down into multiple slices. What I like to do, especially if you're working with people remotely, then it's helpful to keep these sessions down to 2 hours maximum, maybe even 1 hour. Otherwise, people tend to lose focus. And then the main thing is, to try and keep all those sessions into a time period of maybe 2 weeks if you can. I'd say maximum of a month, because the problem is if you take too much time between the smaller sessions, people forget what they said last time, what was done, and you lose momentum. Okay, so you want to do it in a short enough time period that you still have a flow, people remembered what happened in the last sessions, and you're able to get it finished, get it done, foundation put in place, so the team can move on and really collaborate well. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the key aspects of the team forming that you want to look at. So starting with purpose, all right, we want to define purpose, to inspire, motivate, and bring meaning, not just to the team, so that they really can buy into what they're doing, that they have a bit of intrinsic motivation would be the real goal here. That they really enjoy the idea of the problem that they're going to solve, and they really understand it, and they can really buy into it. Okay. And one of the key ways in which we do this is we start with the product vision. So, in this sense, when we talk about the product vision, we're looking for a forward-looking statement that describes the future state or aspirational goals that we want to achieve with our product. Of course, you might say to me, yeah, but what happens if we're in a project environment? It would be very similar. Whether it's a product or a project, you'd still need some sort of vision of what it is that you're trying to do. And I really suggest here, going into detail. You may actually want to. One of the things that I really like to see is people actually drawing something, coming up with a picture of the desired future state, showing their users and how they're solving their needs, and how the solution that they're building is solving the needs. That you actually build that into a picture. Some people like to build like product boxes where they take cuttings from newspapers and things and glue it onto it and build their sort of product box that describes the vision. There are many different ways in which you can do it and make it an interactive activity, but make it really visual, that people can have a real tangible sense of what it is that the future will look like. Okay, and moving on from there, we will want to look at the team mission. So this essentially is what the team does now and every day in order to realize the vision and goals. And this is a little bit different. So we're talking about the daily activities that we will be involved in. Okay. You might have a vision to put someone on Mars, but your mission would be daily. The work that you would be doing is creating a safe rocket that actually can get there to deliver, a person safely on to Mars. And your mission would be looking at perhaps the best rocket or the safest rocket or the fastest rocket, be looking into real practical things that you're doing each day to actually achieve that mission. Okay. um, Moving on from there, we would start to look at some of the main objectives. Now, the danger that you could have here is just to jump into very detailed goals that may only cover the next few weeks or maybe the next quarter. You really want to take a step back here initially and look at your long-term goals or midterm goals for the team to really say, okay, well, what is it we're wanting to do long-term here? What is the problem? What are we trying to achieve long-term? And once that's defined, then of course, at a later stage, you can break that down into quarterly goals if you're using a system like OKRs, etc. Then that's totally possible. But start off with the big picture and slowly then break it down from there. Okay. Um, Moving on from there, we start on a section around alignment, and this is where we really wanting to establish a cross-functional team, with a common purpose and create alignment and trust and a sense of united purpose and commitment, and that's something that we're wanting to do as we align the team. And so, what would this cover? Things like team roles and values and principles and establish working agreements. So let's just dive into that a little. So when we talk about the team and its roles, we're really asking ourselves who is in the team. You know, do we have perhaps one of the big topics these days is do we have enough diversity? So that could be culturally, background, etc., but also diversity of skills. Not just having people with the same skills in the team. do we ask ourselves, do we, and to then go actually further and to say, okay, well, what skills do we even need and traits do we need for the members of the team? And also what roles do we also need and who needs to fill them? And actually defining those roles. In a typical agile team, you'd have, for instance, a product owner, you'd have a coach, an agile coach, and you'd have the developers. But even the developers themselves, just by saying you have a cross-functional team doesn't mean that everyone necessarily it has exactly the same skill set. It actually means that you have everyone you need in your team to create value for the end user. And so there might be people with very different skills. It could be have designers, you could have back-end engineers, front-end engineers, all sorts of different types of people that you need in order to actually reach your goals as a team. And then we go on to the idea of values and principles. And of course, on the one side, you would probably be drawing a lot of the values and principles from the actual organization itself. But you also want to dive into some of the deeply held beliefs of the people in the team, that they help to understand each other. What are super important values that each person holds, and are those things that we need to actually be aware of? Are we taking that into account? And really asking ourselves, under what conditions are we working best here? What is super important for me when we talk about values and principles is values for me obviously are your core values, but then principles talk about how you actually live them out. Okay. So actually writing down how we actually want to live out some of the values as a team could be very interesting and very important for setting also a foundation or a basis for the next discussion around working agreements, where we talk about, on the one side, how is it that we work together? How do we treat each other? Those are going to be some important discussions that we have there. And in the working agreements, we're not just going to, so the typical thing here would be talking about a lot of team processes. This is often where the typical agile processes come in. Are we going to use a backlog with Kanban? Are we going to have daily stand-ups? Are we going to have sprint plannings, etc., etc.? But something else that's important here is, and one of the things I like to use, I have a little canvas where people actually, with some key questions, where you write down as a member of the team, you say, how is it that you like to work with people? What is it that, how would you like to be treated in the team? What are things that you really don't like? What are things that you really do like when people do X, Y, and Z? You have a chance to actually write those down and discuss it with the team. And that's really helpful for really having a real sense of a good sense of how we treat each other. Also, there's some key things that discussions you get into here around rules. Does everyone have to be in the office on a Friday for, let's say the end of the sprint? Do we, what time do we have our daily stand-ups? And things along those lines. There might also be rules around quality. That we agree to follow a set of coding standards? Um, do we have certain practices that we always, code reviews or etc., that we put in place that are accepted as rules that we have to do as part of working with this team? So those are some of the discussions that you'll bring up in your working agreements. And then another key aspect is the context itself, understanding the context of the work that's being done, and also also understanding your constraints and the resources you have, your interactions with other teams, and also assessing your risks. This is all part of the context. And many of the times, this is also where perhaps the discussions might come in around using domain driven design or event storming to actually set the business context, understand the domain that you're working into. But there are also other topics we'll discuss here, other exercises to understand the context of the environment in which you're working, and how do you interact with the rest of the organization and other vendors perhaps. And that we start with when it comes to talking about boundaries and interactions. Okay. So there might be other stakeholders that aren't actively involved with the team, but are really important that you are aware of them, that you are able to contact them, that you've at least met with them as a team. How do we interact with them? Who are we dependent on to do what? who's dependent on us for information. Do we need to actually communicate certain information regularly to the rest of the organization in a particular way? So those are some of the questions that we have to tackle. And also for me, it's very important is this idea around areas of responsibility. So I often like to draw literally a little box and ask the team, okay, what are things that you can actually decide on? Put that in the box. What are things where you actually need to get permission to make a decision, and put those things outside of the box? So you want to have some of those discussions as a team. And then talking about constraints and resources. So, what are our constraints? Where's our space where we can actually make decisions, where we can actually just work and make things happen, and where do we have to actually be cognizant of that actually we certain boundaries to our freedom of decision making, etc. And also when it comes to resources here, it's linked. Do we have our own team budget or a product budget that we can actually to a large degree decide on how we want to spend, or do we actually also need to you know go and actually get permission for certain resources, etc., from the rest of the organization? Where do we stand, and what do we have available to us? And then moving on to the future, near future, and risks. So looking into the near future, asking ourselves also, what risks are there, and who can help us with making sure that we actually reduce the potential impact of those risks. How do we actually address those? Coming up also with clear action items that I would even add to the product team's backlog, to actually address, make sure those things are planned and addressed, and are definitely being tracked, and not pushed to the side once these things are discussed, but that we have real tasks in place to make sure we actually address those risks as soon as possible. And of course, all of this you can actually put into a large canvas. Now, of course, this is a little bit simplified, but those different topics you could put into a canvas. Could put it on a large mirror board, or even if you are working, if you have the benefit of working in a team space, you could have it on the team wall. I would actually recommend putting it near the Kanban board, so that you guys are often looking at it. Even in your stand-ups, you might just have a quick look at it. And one of the areas where you can make sure that you're updating it regularly is to make sure you review it as part of your retrospectives. Now, you might say to me, Alex, isn't that a bit much to review the whole thing in the retrospectives? And I'd say yes. But what you can do is maybe just break it down. So in the time of a quarter, that you look at each different aspect once, in the time or space of the quarter in the retrospectives, just for a couple of minutes. And that way you're just constantly up, reminding yourselves as a team what you guys have agreed to do, and also to see where there's a need perhaps to update something because something has changed. It's also a great way for new joiners who join the team, that they are also seen and are aware of the actual agreements that were made, and are being reminded of it. And helps them to get into the flow of the team and better understand how the team works as they join the team and start working together and collaborating. Great. So that was it for today. Thank you. And of course, if you need some help with your teams, feel free to reach out to us. We'd happy to, if you need an NDA, to sign an NDA and send an offer, we're happy to do that.